Alright, so today we're going to be installing a Viper 5101 remote start system, remote start keyless entry in a 1997 Subaru Legacy. This is the unit we're going with here. The one way, it's got lock, unlock, trunk release. This car doesn't have a trunk release, so we're not going to be using that, but we will hook up the lock, unlock, and of course, most importantly, the remote start aspect of it. And I'm going to go through most of the basic steps over this. First thing I'm going to do is go through the bench press, so I'll go ahead and show you that here shortly, and then we're going to go through basically every connection into the car as well as the bench prep, so it should be pretty simple. Even if you're not doing the same exact remote start, similar direct electronic Viper systems will have the same wire coloring, so you should be able to figure out from there. Even if you're doing a totally different one, the wire colors are totally different. The same basic concept will be here, and I'll show you where I tag all the wires and everything, so it shouldn't be too bad. Alright, so I went ahead, opened it up. Here's all my harnesses. Got the big ignition harness, the antenna cable, antenna itself, some of the auxiliary harnesses with like the tachometer input as well as the hood pin switch. This will have like parking lights, another ground, trunk release, a couple other things we're not going to use. Most of this we're not going to use. This is actually a very simple car. It has no bypass module for it, so there's no anti-theft system in the car at all that we have to interface with, so that'll be really easy to install. We're not going to need any extra bypass. Really, I think the total connections maybe going to be like 10 connections roughly or so. But okay, so the first harness that I always go for is the thicker gauge harness here. So first thing I'm going to do, look at my wiring diagram. I'm looking on Bulldog Security as well as on the 12volt.com. Both of those are great resources for wiring information. So I'm looking there, looking at what I'm going to be needing. So I'm going to have one 12 volt constant, one starter wire, one ignition wire, and then one accessory wire. So basically I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the ones I don't need. So these two right here I'm not going to need because these are extra ones for that stuff. We have the three red here are going to tie together because these are all going to go to 12 volts. So I'm just going to tie them together, and then because there's only one 12 volt wire at the harness here in the ignition harness, so we're going to tie these three here together. And then this purple is going to be the starter wire, orange is going to be the accessory wire, and the pink is going to be the ignition wire. So I'm going to go ahead, get these off to the side. I might not cut them, I might just tie them together and then zip tie them away, because I'm thinking of possibly selling this car in the near future, so I may remove this just to keep it, since the car's not going to sell for a whole lot and nobody's going to give me anything extra for putting this in. So yeah, but I'll go ahead and get this ready, tie these three together, and then move on to the next harness. Alright, so here's what I did here. I basically just clipped these two short, opened up, spliced into here, taped it up, and I got one here to hook up to the 12 volt and the ignition switch, as opposed to having the three hook up there. There's some guys out there who will run all this straight to the battery. There's no need to. You're essentially replicating what the key does. So I don't see the point in running that. I think that's a waste of time and wiring. So that's my opinion on that. But yeah, so we've got the 12 volt here, ignition, starter, and then accessory. So now I'm going to move on to this harness here. I'll get rid of what I don't need, and then I'll just show you what I do need. Alright, so on this other harness here, what I'm left with to use after I taped off the tips, tied up the rest away, is the black ground, red constant 12 volts, white parking lights, and brown horn wire. So these four I'm going to be using. So right now, since I'm already going to be doing 12 volts over here, I'm going to go ahead and tie this red one straight over here into either one of these reds, because they all tie together. That way I'm only going to have one 12 volt connection to the ignition switch. So I'm going to go ahead and do that there, and then I'll move on to the next harness. Alright, and then as far as tying the wires together, I didn't really show that before. So this is essentially what I do. As you can see right here, I stripped away some of the insulation on this red wire here, got the bare wire there, poked a hole in it with my pick tool, and then I got this wire here, so I'm basically just going to put it right up in here, and then wrap it around, and then squeeze together and close it back up. Now, I do recommend going ahead and soldering in here, especially if you've never done a remote start before. It's not necessary on a car like this. On newer cars where you're doing data connections and things like that, definitely necessary. This is an old car. I'm just not doing it because I honestly don't have any solder at the moment. So take that as you will, but This type of connection is something that's worked for me many years. I prefer to solder, but I'm not going to here, so you can do whatever you wish. Alright, and then that's how the connection looks like afterwards. I went ahead and taped it, starting down here, and then taping my way up. A good thing to do afterwards, if you've got some really small zip ties, you can zip tie around these so they're not going to come apart. Definitely a good thing to do, especially if you're in a hotter climate, stuff like that. Inside the car gets super hot, and sometimes the tape can start unraveling. I don't do them individually, tape them up, or I don't individually zip tie them, rather. I go ahead afterwards and zip tie the bundle, that way they're not going to come apart. Normally I would be doing a lot more taping, like taping all these bundles of wires together and everything like that, but like I said, I may end up pulling this back out and reusing it in a different vehicle. So I'm leaving a lot of the wires long. I'm not doing too much tape because it'll be a huge mess to clean up later, so I'm just trying to... This isn't going to be my cleanest install, but it'll be definitely functional. Alright, and on this larger fat harness here, a bunch of these wires I'm not going to use, so I went ahead, taped the tips off, zip tied them to the side. Like I said, I'll be reusing this probably later, so that's that. So I'm getting those out of my way, just moving them over. So what I have left here is the gray and white tachometer, and then black, white, neutral safety input, and then we've got the brown here is for the brake shutdown. So when you turn the key, press the brake, and then it shuts on the remote start and you key takeover. And then this gray one here is going to be for the hood pin switch. So those are the only ones I'm going to use. And since the neutral safety, this one I'm going to have to go ahead and tie it into ground. I'm just going to tie it into the ground right over here in this harness. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Alright, so now that I got the black-white tied over here to the black ground, the next thing I'm going to do is just plug in the toggle switch. This is an on-off switch for if you're getting the car worked on or something, you can flick it so that it doesn't remote start. So that one's just going to plug in here, probably put it up under the dash, assuming there's enough room. They really don't give you a whole lot on this, so there's that. And then the next one after that, I'm just going to go ahead right away and plug in my antenna harness, and then just going to route that along with all the cabling. And also, depending which 5101 model you get, assuming you get this model, you'll get a 451M. This is basically 2 mini relays in one for various lock combinations, which is great on some cars, but on this car, I don't need this fanciness. So what I'm essentially going to do is just use the harness here itself. So I'm going to go ahead and cut these. Basically what I'm using is the green and the blue. So I'm going to go ahead and unravel this and cut it, to a relatively decent length so I can get to where I need to go with the wires, and then do that, because these locks should just be negative triggers, so I shouldn't need this whole relay setup. So I can still use this relay for other stuff later on in the future, so I'm definitely going to hold on to it because they're useful, especially 2 relays in one. For this, I'm just going to be clipping it and then using just the harness itself, and I'll show you what it looks like afterwards. Alright, so now that I depinned the red one here, cut these to length, and then now I just have the blue and green here. Depending which model you get, most of them just come with this. They used to include that relay, now they want you to buy it separate for when you need it, because a lot of cars nowadays don't need it as much, so, whatever. But this is what you're left with here, so these are the lock and unlock wires. So we're going to go ahead and just plug them in here, and then we're basically done with our bench prep. I'm going to tie these together a little bit neater, and then go ahead and get into the car and show you what we need to do there. Alright, so here's essentially what I'm left with. I went ahead and zip tied a bunch of stuff together. It's not the neatest, like I said, but I want this so that the main reason it doesn't look neat is because I didn't cut a bunch of these short. If I cut a bunch of these short and everything like that, it'd look much more sleek and everything like that, but that's not what I'm going for here. Some guys like to go as stealth as possible with this, which is understandable if you're doing a security system, but I'm not. I'm just doing keyless entry and remote start, so not too worried about the presentation of it all. But basically, here's my ignition harnesses, here's my lock harnesses, and everything else here. So basically, I'm going to have the unit itself mounted somewhere, probably zip tied, and then these are each going to go to their respective places. That's why they're not tied together here. I'm going to, route them in the car nicely and everything like that as well still. But yeah, so now that I've got this more or less prepped, I'm going to go ahead and get into the car, start the disassembly process, and show you what we got to go through to test all the wires and where they are and everything like that and how to connect them. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to be doing inside the car is popping off this lower panel here. and there's just two Phillips screws there, so one there and one on the other side, and this thing's just going to pop out. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that and then move on to the next step. Alright, so I got that out of the way. I basically unscrewed it, put the screws back in the holes they went with. It looks like all the screws were the same size, so it shouldn't have made a huge difference, but I put them in there just to not get them confused. So I mean, these are still slightly going to be in the way, but I'll be able to move them out of the way. So the next thing I'm going to do is take off this kick panel here, because there are some wires in that kick panel. I believe the lock wires and a couple others are going to be there. So I'm going to go ahead and take that panel off. Really just going to be clipped here. Just got to be careful with it because it's, 20 years old. And then this guy right here is going to pop out first. I'll use a little panel tool there. And on the inside, let me see if we got anything else holding it. No, looks like it'll just pop out. So I'm going to go ahead and undo that and then get started on the next part, which will be this. Alright, so I got the panel off, nothing broken. Just so you can see what I couldn't see, there's one clip here, one clip here, one clip here, and one clip there. So make sure you put the pressure there. I prefer to use a panel tool. You can get a kit of these for like $5 at Harbor Freight, so there's really no reason to be using a screwdriver. These are made for the job, so yeah. Which is kind of cool that I'm under here right now because there's these holes here, and I kind of want to put some fluid film in here for rust protection, but that's totally other subject. So yeah, I'm going to continue here, get that panel to the side, and then get started over on the column. Alright, this is just me being me. I don't like to take stuff apart if I don't have to, so I'm looking up at what the ignition wires are, and they're black, yellow, blue, red, 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 yellow. And this harness right here, I've got those wires. So I'm not going to undo this up the column up here if I don't have to. So I'm going to tag my wires down here. There's plenty of room there. I'm going to clip that little piece of tape right there holding it and then tap my wires there. And then there's also going to be a horn wire that goes up that way, which I should be able to tag there, as well as a headlight switch wire for the parking lights, which I should be able to tag over in this area too. So I'm not going to take this other column piece off. I'm just going to work with what I've got here. So I'll go get my module, try to set it in an area where I'm going to want it, and then go from there. One thing that I noticed right off the bat is that somebody else has already been in here because there is some aftermarket wiring here. Then I went ahead and traced it just because I was curious, and it looks like it goes to the fog light switch. So some aftermarket fog lights here, probably dealer installed, judging by the vampire clip connectors here, which I don't use, and most reputable installers wouldn't use, so that's probably a dealership install, which unfortunately they go for speed, not functionality, I guess is what you'd say. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the module, try to get it mounted, and try to route my wires to the area they're going to be, and then start doing my connections. Alright, so one thing that I forgot to mention is with the parking lights, there's a jumper for positive or negative parking lights. In this car, it shows two different ones, either a positive and a negative. So I can grab either one, so I'm not going to hook up that fuse jumper until I go ahead and figure out which one I'm going to do. Otherwise you could burn out the switch, or pop a fuse at minimum, or burn out the switch. I've seen both of them happen, so I'm not going to put that in there yet, but just so you're aware of what that's for.